If you're familiar with Star Wars legends, you likely know that the Sith were originally a species of red-skinned humanoids native to the planet Korriban. In the distant past, they were conquered by dark Jedi who proclaimed themselves the Lords of the Sith. By the time of the films, the Sith themselves were long extinct, while the Lords of the Sith remained. But what happened to the original species, the Sith purebloods? If you ask around the fandom, you might get a shocking answer. They were exterminated by the Jedi after the Great Hyperspace War. But was this really true? Did the Jedi Order commit genocide against the Sith?
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
At the start of 5000 BBY, the Sith Empire was enjoying its golden age. Thanks to the rule of Dark Lord Marka Ragnos, the Sith were enjoying an era of unprecedented stability. The Sith Empire ruled over 120 systems within the ring of nebulae known as the Stygian Caldera, as well as a few strongholds beyond the Caldera, including Malachor V and Thule on the nebula's edge and the distant colony of Tund. The Sith Lords who ruled these worlds reveled in wealth and power, and the military might of the Empire as a whole was unprecedented. Just a few years later, however, the Sith Empire ceased to exist, the worlds it ruled were ruined and abandoned, and the Sith themselves were seemingly extinct. If you've been watching our videos about the ancient Sith, you probably know the story of how the Empire did itself in. In 5000 BBY, Marka Ragnos died, leaving two rival Sith Lords, Ludo Kresh and Naga Sadow, to compete for the throne. Kresh was, above all, concerned with keeping the Empire stable, while Sadow wanted to expand into the regions of space. To cut a long story short, Naga Sadow won out and ultimately prosecuted a war against the Republic, the Great Hyperspace War. After Sadow's forces were pushed out of Republic space, they returned to Korriban to regroup, only to find Ludo Kresh and a fleet of warships awaiting them. Sadow and Kresh wasted the last of the Sith Empire's strength trying to kill each other. Naga Sadow ultimately managed to slay Ludo Kresh, but he didn't have much time to celebrate as a fleet of Republic warships led by Empress Teta pursued him to Korriban. As Teta's fleet wiped out the last of the Sith fleet, Naga Sadow bravely ran away. The Great Hyperspace War ended with a decisive Republic victory, and in its wake, the Sith Empire was crippled. As far as the Sith knew, Naga Sadow, Ludo Kresh, and nearly all of the other Sith Lords were dead. One surviving Sith Lord, Shah Dekhan, took up the title of Dark Lord of the Sith after Naga Sadow fled and attempted to rally what was left of the Sith Armada at Korriban. Dekhan's struggle to save the Sith Empire was doomed from the outset, however. Empress Teta and the Republic fleet had left Sith space after Naga Sadow scampered off, but the damage was already done. With the deaths of Sadow and Kresh, the Sith Empire was descending into civil war, first between the followers of the two Dark Lords, and then between hundreds of would-be Sith Lords. Famine and disease spread as the Sith social order crumbled, and the lower caste Sith of many worlds began carrying out mass ritual suicides in shame over the Empire's defeat in the war with the Republic. Now, where have I heard that before? Meanwhile, the Galactic Republic was beginning to recover from the Great Hyperspace War. Parts of Coruscant, a world that had seen some of the worst of the fighting, still lay in ruins, including the Senate District. As the Republic got over the shock of what had just happened, Supreme Chancellor Ultimo ordered an invasion of the Sith Empire. He commanded the Jedi and the Republic military to completely destroy the Empire's political institutions and the dark side cult the Sith Lords had established. The Republic assault was quick and overwhelming. A vast fleet poured into Sith space and laid waste to world after world, obliterating any Sith power centers and military installations they could find. Led by the Jedi on the ground, strike teams defeated any surviving combatants and rounded up any Sith that remained. The Jedi refused to execute captured Sith, however, not even warriors or Sith Lords. Instead, they stripped force sensitivity from any Sith they found, rendering them harmless in the eyes of the Jedi. With that said, there were very few survivors for the Jedi to round up. From Sith Lord to Massassi warrior, almost every last Sith pureblood the Republic forces encountered fought to the death, civilians included. On many worlds, Sith Lords or Kisai priests commanded their subjects to commit suicide en masse when Republic forces showed up in orbit. On some worlds, the Sith inhabitants did this of their own accord. If you're familiar with the real-world Battle of Okinawa, imagine that, but on a planetary scale, repeated on more than 100 worlds. While the Sith were busy offing themselves, the Republic military utterly annihilated any surviving Sith military units and razed almost every fortress in the Empire. Ziost, the Sith capital world, was ravaged, and its towering Sith citadel was left in ruins. Meanwhile, the Jedi began a concerted effort to wipe out Sith ideology, destroying sites tainted by the dark side and ravaging sacred Sith worlds like Korriban. A group of Jedi Sentinels known as the Jedi Shadows scoured the ruins of the Sith Empire, destroying or recovering every last dark side artifact they could find. They received some pushback for this from the Galactic Museum on Coruscant, which argued that the artifact should be turned over for cataloging instead. The Jedi ended up striking a compromise, allowing the museum to take everything except Sith holocrons, which were claimed for study by the Jedi Masters. The Sith Empire crumbled rapidly, and many Sith leaders killed themselves in despair. But where others saw defeat, some saw opportunity. A Sith Lord named Darth Vitiate had stayed out of the Great Hyperspace War and the battle with the Republic as well, watching and waiting. During the last days of the invasion, when most of the Sith were dead and most Sith worlds were abandoned, he made his move. He and his followers, a cult of extremists from Malachor 5, known as the True Sith, sent out messages to all surviving Sith, claiming that the Jedi planned to carry out a genocide of the Sith species and urging survivors to rally on Nathema, Vitiate's homeworld. Concurrently, acting Dark Lord Shah Dekhan waved goodbye to life in a kamikaze attack on a Republic warship above Korriban. This left Vitiate the highest ranking Sith in the Empire, and it also led to a temporary Republic retreat from Korriban, allowing Vitiate to gather the Sith who had hidden there. Vitiate brought all the surviving Sith Lords to Nathema along with 8,000 other Force adepts. He requested their assistance in performing a 10-day ritual, a ritual he claimed would allow the Sith to vanquish the Republic and the Jedi. Instead, this ritual drained the entire planet of life. Darth Vitiate consumed the life forces of the assembled Sith Lords and every other living thing on Nathema. In the process, he made himself immortal. After this, Vitiate gathered nearly all the Sith left in the Empire, claiming that Nathema had been cleansed of life in a treacherous Jedi attack. Asserting that there was no other option, he gathered the surviving Sith onto troop carriers and brought them into the unknown regions. Republic forces resumed their attack on Sith space shortly afterward, completing their counter-invasion and vanquishing the Sith Empire. All told, the operation took a little over a year. After its completion, the Republic abandoned the Sith world, though the Jedi Shadows continued scouring them for Sith artifacts for centuries. But 20 years after the invasion, Darth Vitiate and the True Sith led their refugee fleet across unknown space, deliberately prolonging their wanderings so they would have time to indoctrinate the next generation of Sith youths. By the time the exodus was over, the surviving Sith were completely loyal to the True Sith and to Vitiate, believing they were their saviors. After 2 decades of wandering, Vitiate led the Sith to Dromund Kaas, a swamp world that was a long-lost colony of the Sith Empire. There, in secret, Vitiate proclaimed the formation of a new Sith Empire, a true Sith Empire which would rule in secret for over 1,000 years. But Vitiate's fleet wasn't the only group of Sith to escape the invasion. A few scattered communities of Kisai and Masasi persisted in the desolate ruins of the Sith worlds, mostly on Korriban. These Sith were likely those whom the Jedi had spared and stripped of the Force, and they appear to have eventually died out on their own. But many other groups of Sith fled beyond the borders of the Stygian caldera. A group of Sith zealots settled with a Sith stealth unit on Thul, a remote colony just beyond Caldera, where they remained for thousands of years. On Thul, the Sith priests prophesied the Sith Empire would rise again, and the colony patiently waited for this to come true, training but not doing anything to attract the attention of the Republic. The Sith purebloods among them eventually died off, however, and the Thul colony came under the rule of human Sith loyalists. A small group of Sith exiles landed on Vajun, a remote Republic world, where they intermarried into the planet's aristocratic families, allowing dark side culture and Sith blood to permeate Vajun. A Sith sorceress led a small band to Ambria, another world in Republic space, though she soon ended up destroying herself and all of her subjects in a ritual intended to grant her unprecedented power. One of the largest Sith refugee bands fled to Tund, the most remote colony of the Sith Empire. Tund already had a thriving Sith population. For millennia, it had been the place to which Geetsly and the Sith Lords had banished Sith heretics. The refugees merged with the heretic community there, becoming the Sorcerers of Tund. The Sith purebloods on Tund were still around during the Clone Wars and the Imperial period, having outlasted the rest of their entire species by thousands of years. There was one last surviving community of Sith, perhaps the most important one. Naga Sadow and his Massassi crew escaped the fall of the Sith Empire, and after losing their pursuers in the Denari system, settled on Yavin 4, a remote jungle moon. There, the Dark Lord of the Sith ruled in exile, commanding his followers to build a great temple to serve as bases of power for a new Sith Empire. As it turns out, the story of the fall of the Sith Empire is a lot more complicated than you might think. The common narrative of the Jedi exacting a Sith holocaust is untrue. It's actually in-universe propaganda from Darth Vitiate. However, the Jedi did contribute to the destruction of the original Sith culture, which certainly wasn't the Order's finest moment. But what do you think? Would you like to hear the stories of any of the Sith diaspora colonies? Perhaps the Sorcerers of Tund? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.